Hi everyone, it's Daniel here for Design Break. Today I'm going to try and answer the question, can you build a website in Webflow with absolutely no development experience? So the first thing to get right out of the way is if you're a complete beginner to design and website development and you're looking to just jump in and start adding content, then Webflow probably isn't for you. And I would say probably WordPress and Elementor isn't for you either. You're probably going to be looking at Squarespace, Wix, Weebly, these kinds of platforms that allow you that have all the design done for you, allow you to just put your content in and get going. So I thought I'd get that out of the way first. Okay, so the first use case then is for a novice with no development experience, but you've sort of come to terms with learning something about web development or something about building on the web. So this is where I think Webflow really comes into its own. So I'll compare it mainly to WordPress and Elementor because I think that's probably one of the most popular alternatives, although there are loads. And so the first thing to say, and this could be the end of the video right here really, is that the training on Webflow, the training videos are absolutely fantastic. They are probably the best educational videos I've ever seen. They inject just enough humor into them to make them enjoyable to watch, but not too much that distracts from the content. It's just brilliantly presented by McGuire, and Greamer is one of the producers on there. The two guys just absolutely killing it with those videos. So a really great learning system in place there. With WordPress, you're using other plugins. The documentation isn't great. There are some videos, but they're not always by the first party. So it's not uploaded by Elementor. They're like third party people who are making training videos. So, they're not always kept up to date with new features. And I often find with some plugins on WordPress, there's hardly any documentation at all. And you kind of wonder what one particular setting or feature does. You go and try and find out what it does. The documentation is really slim. It doesn't cover that one thing you were looking for, or it's just, a little bit of a disjointed, a bit of a mess, to be honest, some of the plugins. So, So the second thing in the learning experience is the forum. So Webflow has a fantastic forum. The Webflow staff are on the forum as well, but there's also loads of people on there really more than happy to help you out, even if it's design questions, which they're not really supposed to help with. It's just meant to be like technical help, but they will help you with pretty much any issue you have. And the great thing with Webflow is it's all in the one place. With WordPress, you've got, WordPress has their own system, Elementor has their own system, Visual Composer and WP Bakery and all the different plugins and platforms, WooCommerce, they all have their own support system. So there's not one single place to find help for something, which means you resort to trawling through Google results, and it makes for just not a great experience, whereas Webflow has a really fantastic forum there. One of the advantages, though, on WordPress is that the learning curve isn't quite as steep. So the learning curve on Webflow is fairly steep if you're a novice with no development experience at all. But I think my personal opinion is that that's more than outweighed by how great the training documents are, because you really can quite easily learn just by if you've got the time just to take, a week of evenings going through the basics of the Webflow videos, you're going to have grasped how to use Webflow to create a website in that amount of time. Honestly, it's that easy. Whereas WordPress, I feel like you're going to easily come up against frustrations, even though you can jump in quicker. It's almost at your detriment because you've kind of jumped the gun a little bit, and when it comes to looking up the support for the things you've not been able to figure out, it's almost like not there, and then that's when you have an issue. So although Webflow's got a steeper learning curve, it's much easier to follow that path. And so the final point on learning the platform is that with Webflow, you're actually going to be learning how web code functions. So when you add an element in, let's say like in WordPress and Elementor, if you add an element like 2 columns, all they do is call them columns. And then if you add like an accordion element, it just adds the accordion element in. There's no explanation further on any of the code that's happening in the background. It just generates all of that and hides it from you, if you like. Now, Webflow doesn't show you the code unless you turn that feature on, but the properties you're controlling are code properties. So if you want to create 2 columns, you would create 2 div blocks and then a container div block, and you would give that a class. So you're learning how code actually works. So even though you don't have to manipulate the code directly, you are manipulating the code by changing those parameters. So yeah, it's you're learning actually how code works, which means if you do end up having to speak to a developer or anything you're working on in future, you've got that knowledge there, which can be really helpful. So something I'll mention really briefly as well is the template system. So it used to be that Webflow was a little bit more limited in the templates it had available, but now it's a vast library of templates from all kinds of industries, and they really are fantastic. The quality of the templates on Webflow is really, really, really great. I mean, probably better than WordPress, I would say, in terms of the offering. The WordPress definitely has the quantity advantage, far and away, many, many thousands more themes available for WordPress, but the templates that are available for Webflow are very high quality, and you've obviously got infinite customizability with any theme that you have. So it's not some themes that you get for WordPress, it's kind of like quite set, and you can change like your brand color and your logo, and that's sort of it. With Webflow, any template you install is like totally customizable. It's kind of like loading something in and then having the flexibility to change anything about it. So it's really, really great. And it does have templates. It also has pre-built sections, kind of like what you would have with Elementor. So you can drag like a call to action element in, or you can drag in a 2-column layout. So there's different layouts you can add. And I think that they're still currently expanding what's available. So I guess the next potential audience is people who have design knowledge but no actual development knowledge. So I think that Webflow is a fantastic tool for this audience as well. And part of that is because Webflow will feel like one of your design programs. And it's so much so that I have even tried to scroll around the website while holding the space bar. And if you've ever used any of Adobe's design programs, you'll understand why I'm doing that, which you can't do in Webflow. It's just obviously you're looking at the website, you can scroll up and down, but you can't pan around it like you would on an artboard. So it really feels like another design program, which if you're a designer is fantastic. You feel right at home in the interface. Obviously, the way you use the tools will be slightly different. You can't click and drag an object just anywhere on the page. For example, you need to move it within different div blocks and use margin and padding to space things around as you need them. But like I say, the educational videos that bring you up to speed on that are fantastic. So it's a great resource. The main hurdle that you'll really have is building websites that conform to web best practices. Because Webflow does allow you to create a website that, for example, has 20 H1s on the page, which is bad for SEO, or that has non-responsive layouts. It's very easy if you're just positioning something around and you're not aware of web best practices, you could create a monster. I think that's one of the advantages that Elementor has with WordPress, which is it shields you a little bit from that, in that the columns are naturally set up to be responsive. The sections are naturally set up to be responsive. And if you're a beginner, it adds padding to things as well. So you don't have to manually add the padding. You can just drop elements in and it'll space them out and you won't have any spacing issues. So yeah, there's Webflow, because it has more granular control and it has more options, does also mean there's potentially more to go wrong. But if you're a designer, you're probably going to know where you need the padding and spacing anyway. So as you can see, the answer really, in my opinion, is yes, you can build a website with no development knowledge. I mean, that's kind of their whole thing. Webflow's ethos is no code, so you shouldn't really need any development knowledge to build a website. It's really just about learning the platform and learning how the platform works, which I think you need to do with WordPress and Elementor anyway, and all the other CMS platforms. They all have a bit of learning required before you can really create something. So I think, yes, you definitely can. The last thing I wanted to mention was situations where, as a novice or without development experience, you might want to avoid Webflow. Obviously, I love Webflow and we use it for all of our big projects, but there are some instances where Webflow is still developing and WordPress is much more mature. One of those is advanced e-commerce. So Webflow has e-commerce, but it's not particularly fleshed out in terms of functionality. So they only just recently added coupon codes. Bulk discount pricing, for example, is one of the things it doesn't have. There's lots of sort of little features that it doesn't have, whereas WordPress and WooCommerce have almost infinite plugins. You can, if you've got a particular scenario of type of pricing that you want, you can find it. If you want a credits-based system, you can find it. If you want subscription-based, you can find that. Webflow is much more limited in that sense. And there are plugins, but then they actually require a little bit of code knowledge or integration knowledge, and it starts to become a bit more technical. So advanced e-commerce, I would say WordPress is probably a better bet for that. User websites is another one. So there is no native function on Webflow for user login. So if you want your customers to be able to log into their website to see their previous orders or save payment details, you can't do that, unfortunately. They do integrate with MemberStack. I personally haven't used MemberStack integrated with Webflow yet. So I don't know all the functions that it has. I'm sure there's other videos on that, but that's an option. But again, it's not native, so it does introduce an element of trying to get everything to talk nicely to each other. And then the final thing would be the really specific requirements. The example I've got here for that is perhaps like rental vehicles. So if you own a fleet of vehicles that you rent out and you want customers to be able to book them on certain dates, you want a CMS where you can upload the vehicles you have, add service maintenance dates in there, and have a turnaround time logged and collect all the sort of payment from the customer for the booking. WordPress allows you to buy themes that will do exactly that. A theme that has had all that functionality developed into it, you just download, install the theme, and that's kind of it done. Webflow isn't quite at that stage just yet. So you could build that website on Webflow, but it would probably need a fair bit of custom development or a lot of integration through platforms like Integromat or Zapier. So you need to really work on how that integrated. So that would be easier to create on WordPress because you can just install that template, install that theme. That's it, done. It's basically just customized at that point. Add your logo, add your own content, and you've got a functioning website. In Webflow, you could build it, but it's going to be much more difficult. More integrations and that kind of thing. But generally, unless you have something really specific like that, Webflow is a fantastic platform. My personal opinion is I prefer it over WordPress and Elementor. Definitely much prefer it. I'm a designer though, and the design tools that Webflow gives you are just far better than WordPress and Elementor because you've got much more control. So that's probably a large part of it. But yeah, you can build a website in Webflow without any development experience. That's their whole thing. You just need to learn a little bit about the platform first. So if you have any questions about it at all, feel free to drop them in the comments and I'll be in there and I can reply to you. If you liked the video, please hit like. And if you subscribe to our channel, you'll get updates when we post new content. And we'll see you in the next one.